Behind the laughter, the quick wit, and the polished Hollywood smile, Bob Hope's final chapter unfolded in a way few fans ever imagined. And it is here, in the shadows behind the spotlight, that his story becomes most haunting. Once the undisputed king of American comedy, a man whose name symbolized optimism, wealth, and glamour, Hope spent his last years surrounded not by applause, but by quiet decline, while the grand estate that once echoed with celebrity laughter now sits in unsettling silence. To understand how this legend arrived there, you have to look far beyond the jokes and into a life filled with contradictions, ambition, love, secrecy, and relentless reinvention. Long before Bob Hope became a household name, he was navigating the tangled intersection of romance and show business, beginning with his first known marriage to Grace Louise Troxell, a Chicago secretary he married in 1933, only to see the union collapse less than 2 years later. Even then, Hope's personal and professional lives were inseparable, sharing stages, tours, and ambitions, blurring the lines between love and performance. As his career accelerated, so did the complexity of his relationships, especially with Dolores Reed, a former Ziegfeld beauty whose transition from stage partner to life partner remains clouded in mystery, timelines overlapping, marriages questioned, records missing, and whispers of bigamy lingering in the background. Despite the ambiguity, Dolores became the anchor of Hope's domestic life, adopting 4 children with him, raising a family that outwardly reflected stability, while rumors of infidelity quietly followed him for decades. Hope's reputation as a womanizer, involving actresses, chorus girls, and beauty queens, stood in stark contrast to his carefully curated public image as America's genial, family-friendly entertainer, a duality he maintained with remarkable skill. As the years passed and the curtain slowly lowered, age began to strip away the invincibility that once defined him. In his 90s, Hope converted to Catholicism, embracing Dolores's faith, perhaps seeking peace as his body weakened. Though his public appearances continued, each one reminding audiences that time eventually humbles even legends. By the time he reached 100, celebrated nationwide with streets renamed and honors bestowed, his humor remained intact, masking the physical fragility beneath. When he died in 2003 from pneumonia, the world mourned a symbol of an entire century. Yet few truly grasped how quiet and isolated his final chapter had been. That contrast becomes even more striking when examining his homes, especially the Toluca Lake Estate, a sprawling 1939 mansion that once embodied Hollywood excess with its golf hole, indoor pool, and endless parties attended by the industry's elite. For more than 60 years, it was both sanctuary and stage, hosting the glittering social life of a man who thrived on attention. After Dolores's death in 2011, however, the house stood frozen in time, a ghost of its former vibrancy, until its sale in 2018 marked the end of an era. Equally iconic was Hope's futuristic Palm Springs retreat, designed in 1979 by architect John Lautner, a dramatic volcanic structure rising from the desert like a monument to celebrity ambition and modernist excess, a place where Hope escaped Hollywood while still commanding awe. These homes, so grand and distinctive, stand in stark contrast to his modest beginnings in Cleveland, Ohio, where a young immigrant boy learned resilience, timing, and observational humor among working-class families, shaping the relatable comedic voice that would later resonate with millions. From Cleveland's streets to Hollywood's mansions, from USO stages to silent rooms at the end of life, Bob Hope's story is one of extraordinary success, layered with unresolved contradictions, private struggles hidden behind public laughter, and a legacy far more complex than the jokes that made him famous. As Bob Hope's story continues beyond the applause, the contrast between the man and the myth becomes even more striking, because while the public remembered him as tireless, generous, and eternally upbeat, his later years unfolded in near silence, surrounded by memories too large for any room to contain, and the weight of a century lived almost entirely in the public eye. The Toluca Lake estate, once alive with studio heads, movie stars, politicians, and laughter that spilled late into the night, slowly transformed into a sealed time capsule, its corridors holding echoes of conversations long gone, its rooms filled with trophies, photographs, and reminders of a life spent performing for others. After Dolores's death, the house no longer had a voice, and for many that emptiness felt symbolic, as if Hollywood itself had quietly stepped away from one of its greatest figures. Hope's immense fortune, estimated in the hundreds of millions, stood in stark contrast to the simplicity he often projected, revealing a man who understood business as deeply as he understood timing and delivery. His real estate investments across California, from the San Fernando Valley to the Coachella Valley, were not impulsive indulgences but calculated decisions, reflecting foresight and a desire for control in a world where fame offers very little permanence. Even his futuristic Palm Springs home, so bold and dramatic in design, felt like an extension of his public persona, larger than life, unforgettable, and carefully engineered to leave an impression. Yet beneath that architectural spectacle was a man retreating from the noise, seeking calm in wide desert skies and quiet mornings away from cameras. As his health declined, the once unstoppable performer became increasingly dependent on routine, care, and familiarity, and those closest to him witnessed a softer, more vulnerable side rarely seen by the public. Friends who visited him in his final years described moments of clarity mixed with long silences. A man who had spent decades filling airwaves, now content to listen. His humor never fully left him, but it slowed, becoming more reflective, more inward, as though he were privately reviewing a lifetime of punchlines and applause. The irony of Bob Hope's ending is that a man who gave so much joy to others spent his last chapter largely unseen, his legacy already cemented while he quietly faded from view. When news of his death spread, tributes poured in from every corner of the world, from presidents to soldiers, from comedians to everyday fans who felt they had grown up with him. Cartoonists captured him being welcomed into heaven by Bing Crosby, a visual shorthand for a friendship and era that defined American entertainment, and those images resonated because they reflected how deeply Hope had embedded himself into the cultural fabric. Yet even as he was celebrated as a symbol of optimism, patriotism, and humor, the abandoned rooms of his estate told a different story. One of impermanence, of how even the brightest stages eventually go dark. Bob Hope's life was not a simple rise and fall tale, but a complex portrait of ambition, discipline, generosity, contradiction, and survival across an entire century. He mastered the art of being liked while keeping much of himself guarded, shared laughter freely while carrying private burdens, and built monuments of success that outlived the man himself. In the end, his story reminds us that legends are human first, shaped by choices, relationships, and time, and that behind every familiar smile is a life far more intricate than the image we are shown. And yet even this sweeping rise from modest immigrant beginnings to unimaginable fame does not fully capture the emotional weight of Bob Hope's final years. Because while the world continued to celebrate his legacy, his personal world was steadily shrinking, room by room, voice by voice, until only echoes remained. As his health declined, the once tireless performer who had crossed continents to entertain troops now moved cautiously through the halls of his Toluca Lake mansion, a home built for laughter and crowds that had grown far too large for a single aging man. Dolores remained his closest companion, fiercely protective, managing both his public image and private frailty, ensuring that the legend the world saw never cracked, even as the reality behind closed doors grew heavier. When she passed away years later, the silence inside that estate became almost symbolic, a physical manifestation of how time dismantles even the grandest lives. The sale of the mansion, the removal of personal artifacts, and the eventual abandonment of its original purpose marked the quiet erasure of a living legacy, transforming a once vibrant space into a haunting reminder that fame does not grant immortality. His Palm Springs retreat, once a futuristic escape filled with sunlight and celebrity guests, also changed hands, its dramatic architecture now standing as a monument not just to innovation, but to the fleeting nature of cultural relevance. Through it all, Bob Hope's enormous fortune, amassed through decades of tireless work, investments, and brand power, remained one of the largest in entertainment history. Yet wealth could not preserve the vitality that defined him. In the end, what lingers most powerfully is the contrast. A man who spent his life making the world laugh, facing his final chapter in quiet dignity, leaving behind empty rooms, legendary stories, and a century-spanning legacy that continues to fascinate long after the applause has faded.